Recording. I just need to show you this, sorry. Nugget, why are you in my cajon? Please say you're not stuck. Crazy animal. Anyway, we've documented our self-build extension project from start to finish, and hopefully it's a bit of an eye-opener as to what's involved in a project like this. Nugget, you're going to cause all sorts of continuity problems. Last time we looked at how much the project cost. Today we're going to look at exactly how long it took, and I'll also answer that hanging question from last time. How much time did we personally invest in the project? Hiya folks, and welcome back to the show. Whether you're planning on doing a house extension or an addition, as I've learned it's called across the pond. Anyway, hopefully all of this shines a little bit of light on what's involved in a project like this and why good builders are worth their weight in gold. Building projects are complex, and as I've said before, often it can be easier to build a whole new house from scratch than it is to build a new bit onto an old house. Our house is 100 years old, and that brings about challenges that you often can't plan for. Nugget, where in God's name are you going? Are you alright there, Nugs? What are you up to? You seem to be setting up camp. Anyway, later on, I suppose I'll tell you how much our time was worth on this particular project. But for now, let's dive in and take a look at how long the build actually took. And by the way, this isn't some weird competition of who can build projects the quickest or the cheapest. This is just how long this project took in our particular situation for our type of house in our area with the skill sets that we had available. So there's a lot of stages involved here. So to try and explain it, I'm going to split it over effectively 24 months. So I've got two sheets here that I'm going to fill in and explain how the whole process worked. This doesn't actually equate to months of the year. It's just the best way I can think of kind of explaining the stages of the build. So if we go all the way back to when we first purchased the property, the very first thing that we did is we made a start on the plans, and we got our architect involved. That's a very badly drawn plan of a house, but you get the general idea. So obviously we went back and forward with our architect until we got everything the way that we wanted it. Then in month 2, we submitted our party wall notices. And it was also around this time that we submitted our plans to the council to get planning permission. Now, because we were fairly confident that planning permission would get passed, because we're doing exactly the same extension that pretty much everyone on the street has already done, we were confident enough to plough on with things like the building regs application. But that is a little bit of a gamble, because if planning decide to reject your application and then you've already gone through all the trouble of putting a building regs application in and you end up having to change everything, it can add a lot of extra costs on. But really it was in month 3 for us that we got the building regs application put together, and that also involved speaking to our structural engineer. In month 4, the building regulations application was approved. So that's a bit of a milestone. I'm going to mark that with a green tick. In month 5, nothing really happened, but we're still waiting on planning permission to come through. That didn't come through until month 6. So that's another milestone. Unfortunately, we then ran into a problem with one of the neighbours who refused to sign off on the party wall notices that were submitted back in month 2. So that meant we had to get a party wall surveyor appointed. In the meantime, we also had to get our build over agreement for building over the public sewer. That was granted pretty much straight away, so that's another milestone. And then by month 9, the party wall award was granted. And obviously that's the last major kind of planning stage milestone, because that means we can actually start on the build. Now, the other thing worth mentioning is that throughout all of this, we were working on the main renovation of the house itself. That was all of the work that you've probably seen that we did early on the property just to get the place livable. So that were things like new water supply, electrics, plumbing, central heating, all of that sort of stuff had to be sorted out because we had a deadline for when we were moving in. Yes, we lived in the property while we did the extension. In the meantime, we needed to get a few jobs done before the build could start anyway. These jobs would have needed doing regardless. So for example, the garage, even if we weren't doing the extension, would have needed demolished and rebuilt because it had an asbestos roof and there was various other problems with it. In month 8, we did a lot of the drainage work. Again, it was drainage work that needed done anyway because the drains were absolutely shot. And then I think I've mentioned it before, but because we were working on this kind of mid-lockdowns and all that sort of thing, we did a lot of our material ordering in advance. We pretty much got almost everything to do with the core build ordered and on site before our bricklayer even started. So month 9 was really spent doing materials ordering and basically getting everything absolutely ready, so as soon as the party wall award was granted, we could just make a running start. So then in month 10 we dug the foundations. It's worth mentioning here that between digging the foundations and getting the concrete pumped in, we had biblical rain, so we had to deal with all of that. And a couple of people rightly queried why we didn't use more skips on this project. And it's basically because we could get rid of a lot of the soil from digging the foundations out by raising parts of the garden. It was very muddy and hard work, but it probably saved about 500 quid on waste disposal fees. We had our first visit from the building inspector. That has to be done before any concrete is poured so they can check that the foundations have been dug properly. We then got the concrete pumped in. And of course our brickie started. There was a second building regs inspection once we had reached DPC level. So in this month there was actually 2 visits from the building inspector. I'm going to write inspections with a little I, and there was 2 of them for that month. So as I say, I did all of the labouring for our brickie and we got all the brickwork complete. I'm saying we, the royal we. Our amazing brickie got all of the brickwork and blockwork done. It was 13 days, not consecutive days, but 13 days of work it took to do the core build. In parallel with this, me and Mrs. Mac, in any spare time that we did have, we'd be working on things like the upstairs knock-through, general kind of site preparation, getting everything in the right place at the right time. As soon as the brickie was finished, we got the window company out to measure up for all of the windows and doors, so they were ordered in month 11. I'm actually going to call this month 2 of the build, so that's month 1 of the build, because really the build didn't start until here when the party wall award had been issued. I appreciate that there's some things here that under normal circumstances, demolishing the garage and drainage work, that would be part of the build. But to be honest, that didn't take long. That took, 3 or 4 days all in to do all of that. We also did all of the prep work ready for the hipped roof going in on the upper extension, and we got our joiners in to do the hipped roof. As I think I've mentioned before, the hipped roof was done in 2 days. We also installed the steel work, and this is also the month where the roofers started as well. And obviously as soon as the joiners were done on building the structure of the hipped roof, the roofers got it all tiled and all that sort of thing. In the meantime, in month 3 of the build, me and Mrs. Mac built the lean-to roof at the back. And as soon as that was done, the roofers did all of their stuff. Once the roof was on, then it was back over to us to do all of the kind of the fascias and trims and soffits and guttering. And we also made a start on the upstairs joists for the bedroom. We got our structural engineer to spec for putting a ledger board in rather than putting the joists embedded in the wall. And that meant that the brickie could basically get on and do the entire build without there being any joists in the road. So we just had a temporary scaffolding platform built inside until we had the joists in. But it just meant that the brickie wasn't waiting for me because I just couldn't keep up with him, basically. Now this sounds like quite a lot of stuff happened in month 3 of the build, but actually this only took about a week, and then we all got hit with the coof, so that pretty much wiped the rest of that month out. So then on to year 2, or month 4 of the build, if you like. In month 4, we got the garage door fitted, we got the oversight concrete in the lean-to extension, we did the garage ceiling, installed all of the structural loft timbers, we got our first batch of first fix plumbing and electrics done, sorted all of the insulation in the bedroom, and at that point, because the roof was now on, it was time for another building regs inspection. Then in month 5, we installed all of the kitchen, floor joists and flooring. Not the final flooring, by the way, just the subfloor. We built the partition wall for the ensuite in the bedroom. And we sorted out all of the kitchen insulation. So that's both, obviously, underfloor insulation and all of the insulation in the rafters. Then, in month 6 of the build, we got our first batch of windows installed. But if you remember, we had a delay on the bifold doors. We'll come to that in a minute. We got the bedroom all plastered out. And then in terms of plasterboarding in the kitchen, basically any plasterboard that needed to be screwed to something we did. We got the plasterers to do anything that needed to be dot and dabbed. So we did all of the kitchen ceiling and all of the boxing and stuff like that. In month 7 of the build, the bifolds were finally installed. And that's actually a big milestone because it means that we were finally watertight. I'm going to put a little W there. That meant we could then do the knock through into the living room, get all of the final first fix electrics done, get all of the fascias and guttering sorted on the lean-to extension. At this stage, we also got all of the rendering done. And then that brings us up to month 8 of the build where we had the plasterers booked to plaster the kitchen. We then had all of the second fix electrics done, and we also did all of the final drainage. Really all of the last bits and pieces, so things like loft insulation, vent tiles. We fitted the ensuite and started on some of the decorating, so mist coating walls. And once that was done, that was essentially the shell build finished. So then the next stage, that didn't happen till month 9 technically, but the building inspector came out, everything passed inspection, and we got our building regs completion certificate. So at that point, the shell was really complete. So in other words, if we had been getting a builder to do the work for us, that would have been the builder all done at that point. But then, of course, we're on to a whole load of finishing work to get everything actually livable. So, for example, connecting up the bedroom radiators, all of the decoration in the bedroom carpet, and then at that point the bedroom was done. So we'll mark that kind of as a double milestone, I think, because we've got not only our shell complete, but we've also got the bedroom completely finished as well. Then in month 10 of the build, we did all of the kitchen final flooring and we fitted the kitchen. At that point, we then had to wait for the worktops to be templated and for those to be fitted. That happened in month 11 of the build. We could then get on with all of the final second fix plumbing. So in other words, basically fitting the sink and all that sort of stuff. By the way, in case you're wondering what's happened to first fix plumbing, we designed everything in such a way that there is no plumbing under the floors at all. We've kept everything above floor level. So basically there was no first fix plumbing as such. Everything was kind of second fix. But obviously that depends on the nature of your build if you want to do it like that. But personally, I prefer to keep as many pipes above floor level as possible. And then finally in month 12, we did all of the kitchen final joinery. So skirting boards, architraves, trims, any last bits of boxing, all that sort of stuff. We sorted all of the final lighting, decoration, and then that was essentially the kitchen done. So obviously another milestone there. That's essentially everything completely finished. I'll just mark on here the shell build finished at month 8. See if I've got a pen that actually works. So this section here and on the previous sheet, I'll show you in a second, but that's basically the shell build, and then all of this is the fitting out work. So the main shell build took effectively about 8 months, but I am knocking a month off because we really were genuinely wiped out for about 4 weeks. And then all of the fitting out work, that was about 4 months before it was completed, but it wasn't 4 months of work because obviously a lot of the time we're waiting on things like worktop templating, worktop fitting, and waiting for tradespeople to come and stuff like that. So again, if we were kind of on top of our game, I reckon we would have got the whole lot done, including fit out, in about 11 months. So a lot of you wanted to know how much time we personally invested in this project, and it's a very valid question, but it's also, well, I'll explain in a minute why it's a little bit meaningless. We've worked out that we spent about 58 man days, or person days, because it was me and Mrs. Mac, so about 58 days on the shell build, and it was about 25 days of extra work on the fit out. Now those aren't consecutive days, and because we managed the project ourselves, it gave us the flexibility to fit things around our day jobs. We're very fortunate in the fact that we run our own business from home and we can be flexible in terms of what hours we work on that business. Sometimes it'll be 80 hours a week, sometimes it'll be 20 hours a week. We are in control of that. Anyway, as we explained last time, the entire shell build of the project cost us about 53 grand, including planning fees. And a few of you wanted to know what would that increase by if you attributed a labour rate to the time that we'd spent on the project. So unfortunately, that's a very difficult question to answer because the number that I will give you is completely meaningless. And I'll explain why in a minute. But for argument's sake, if you equate our time to being worth £40 an hour, which is literally a number out of thin air, the shell build, as I say, took 58 days. So at £40 an hour, about 7 hours a day, that would work out at about 16 grand. And the fit out at £40 an hour for 25 days would be about an extra 7 grand. So if you work that back from the original 53 grand for the shell build, that would make it cost 69 grand if you include our time. And if you then add in the 16 grand extra that it cost for the fit out plus 7 grand of our time, that comes in at 92 grand. But obviously that's not what we spent. It's a bit of a meaningless number. You see, we're not professional builders, and if we were professional builders, I would be charging a lot more than £40 an hour. It also doesn't relate in any way to the UK average wage, which is probably closer to about £15 an hour. And obviously, if you're in a country other than the UK, which 60% of you are, then it's even more meaningless because I don't know what your hourly rates are wherever you are in the world. And by the way, while we're on the YouTube nerdy stuff, YouTube tells me what other channels you guys watch, and it's genuinely fascinating. I'll save that for the end of the video. So the important thing to consider here is that, yes, we did this as a self-build extension because we couldn't find a builder, more about that in a later episode, but we also did it because we love doing this sort of work. If you head over to the member zone, you'll see we're already well into our next project, and I'm sure there'll be many more projects after that. My dad was a spark, my wife's dad is a retired joiner, and he's done several self-builds. We've literally grown up watching our Wiedersehen pet while playing in building sites. And because I'm Gen X, that kind of deviated to a bizarre career in IT, which I didn't particularly choose, but that's a whole nother story for another day. I would love to do a full self-build, but land is just far too expensive in the UK now. But who knows, maybe we could even look further afield. That would make a very interesting video series. But anyway, my point is, and I know this is going to sound utterly bizarre to a lot of you, but building stuff is kind of like a hobby to us, and as such we did a lot of the work on this extension in evenings and on the weekends and during holidays, bearing in mind that we had lockdown at the time, so there wasn't much else to do. So I'm not really sure how you can attribute an hourly rate to that. It's kind of meaningless. And on the subject of hourly rates, I've been harping on about this for the last 10 years, that tradespeople don't charge enough. That's one of the reasons we've got such a big skills shortage in this country, and across Europe, by the way, and the States, and Australia, and New Zealand. It's the same across the world. I've made several videos about what hourly rate you should really charge, links in the description below. That all came about on the back of tradespeople who were saying that they were happily charging £15 an hour, and I was trying to explain to them that you can't possibly run a business and make a profit charging £15 an hour. I really don't think any self-employed tradesperson should be charging a penny under £200 a day now, and that goes for labourers as well, and that should only increase with experience and the complexity of the job that you're working on. Having had a glimpse of what's involved in being a labourer, I think that's one of the most important jobs on the building site. A good labourer can make or break a job. I think I've mentioned this before, but back in IT days, 20 years ago, we would be charging out network engineers at £1,000 a day, and that was for a single network engineer. You should see what they're charging now, by the way. But you know, that's commercial life, and that's why a lot of good builders have stopped doing domestic work altogether. But unfortunately, when it comes to building projects, we do have to live with one simple factor, other than the affordability of the project, and that is the ceiling price of the street. House prices are already through the roof, not only in the UK but across the world, and if you factor in another £200,000 on an extension, you're going to quickly realise that you're going to be much better off just buying a brand new house. So builders have the tricky task of trying to balance a fair rate of pay for themselves, along with catering for the risks involved on a project, which can be huge, and doing all that while making sure that the project is affordable for the people who live in their catchment area. This is why the only option for most builders is to manage several projects at the same time, and that is completely normal. It's the most efficient way of running the projects. I think maybe part of the problem here is that a lot of people view builders as being, well, builders. You think of a builder as someone who's going to build a house from beginning to end, but that's not really the case. Builders are generally bricklayers, joiners, or in my view, the dream team of a brickie, a chippy and a spark. In fact, there's an interesting question for all you builders out there. If you could pick a dream team of, say, 4 permanent employees, what would they be? What trades would you pick out? I think a spark is so handy to have on staff for just various stages of the project, everything from demolition right through to final kind of second fix and everything. I think having a spark on staff is a good idea. I'll stop telling me granny how to suck eggs. I do apologise, I've only done one relatively minor build. So anyway, with house prices going through the roof and builders therefore wanting to pick the most lucrative jobs, which generally means working on the most expensive houses, that coupled with there being more commercial work around and there being a massive skills shortage of people knowing what a hammer is. And by the way, I do get the odd comment, it's pretty rare these days, but I get the odd comment of people saying, oh, by you showing people how to do stuff on YouTube, you're going to cause everyone to lose their jobs. And I can assure you, your job is safe. You would not believe, back in property maintenance days, maybe it warrants a separate video, you would not believe what people are incapable of doing themselves these days. Anyway, my point is, with the way things are going, it could really start to become the norm that if you want an extension done, you're going to have to build it yourself. Our brickie was quite clear when he said to us, I'm going to turn up and lay bricks. I'm having nothing to do with managing your project for you. And while I'm at it, would we buy another new build house? Yes, we absolutely would, but that's another topic for another day because, oh man, new builds. Oh. Anyway, I'm completely going off on one. I promised I'd let you know what other channels you guys subscribe to. This is genuinely fascinating. So, top 5 other channels that you guys watch in the last 28 days. Skill Builder at number 1, Charlie DIY at number 2, Mr. A Builders, excellent channel, only just discovered that one. N Bundy Electrical, and of course a restoration couple. And then the next bunch, Black Belt Barrister, excellent channel, Scott Brown Carpentry, Proper DIY, the master himself, Robin Clevitt, and GB News. Isn't that interesting? And then we've also got Salvage Rebuilds UK. I must admit I've never watched that channel, but I will check it out. MJ Tiff Plumbing, The DIY Guy, Rag and Bone Brown, and of course New Home Quality Control, superb channel. Folks, I know my videos are a bit sporadic these days, so we'll get more regular, I promise. That's just things are very, very busy. But if you do have a shortage of things to watch, there's 15 channels you need to subscribe to straight away. Folks, in other news, I'm back on Twitter for my sins. I deleted my account in a girly strop about 3 years ago, and in hindsight that was probably a bad move. I've obviously lost all my followers that I had. So if you could do me a massive favour and re-follow Gosforth Andy on Twitter, and if you could tell literally everyone you know to follow Gosforth Andy on Twitter as well, that would be really cool. My Twitter usage will be random and sporadic at best, but who knows, it might be a bit of a laugh. And it's recently come to my attention that 70% of you haven't hit the subscribe button on this channel. What's going on? Even if you don't use the subscribe button, if you could massage my ego by hitting the subscribe button and the like button, that would be wonderful. And of course, if you want to support this channel, because I'm still holding out on trying not to do any sponsorships, do head over to the member zone where I'm currently churning out a whole series of videos about renovating a new build of all things. Also remember, I've added a corrections page on the Gosforth Handyman website because I generally don't script these videos, so if I'm making stuff up like off the top of my head and I accidentally say something wrong and I don't discover I've messed up until after the video's gone live, it's kind of handy to have a page on the website where I can kind of just give myself a bit of a slap in the face. My aim on this channel is, and always has been, for it to be a fun place to kind of hang out and learn about various things generally relating to maintaining houses. And I want that information to be as honest and truthful as I can possibly make it. So I don't really care. If I mess up, I'm going to tell you about it. I messed up on heat pumps, I think. Or I've softened on heat pumps. We'll talk about that on another video. For now, folks, as per usual, look after one another, be nice to each other, and we shall see you next time. Tatty bye. Go. You come down. What are you doing? Come on. Way.